Hello and welcome to Just Onside. It's been one heck of a week. It's been a tough week, but made it to Friday. So, OS, I'm absolutely shattered. But how are you?
I'm good, buddy. I'm good. Yeah, Friday. Some respite, as you like to say, and some good football this weekend as well. But yeah, it's been a long week. But yeah, glad to make it to Friday. We're both dressed in black. That also wasn't coordinated, I believe. So all good.
It's. I think. I
Reflective,
think it's. I think it's
reflective of
navy
our
blue,
moods.
but it's just the bad lighting.
As
Everything.
always.
Everything. Everything looks black. But it's. I'm just relieved as well. It's the football's back. The international. It just is. I. It's the biggest waste of time, and we wish we could just concentrate on tournament football, play a few games before. But I presume you've got to qualify for tournament, so. Maybe it's impractical, but I'm glad. So Leeds are playing on Sunday, so I've got a couple of days where I don't have to stress too much. All right, okay, but right, let's talk football, and we'll talk about. It was on the overlap. I think Gary Neville. He talked about Casemiro and Rashford. They'd got 5 days off, so as professional athletes, you should be rested. But they decided to swan off to America. Uh, Old Nev weren't too happy. What about you? Were you happy?
Yeah, we thought we'd start with this because it did make quite the rounds, didn't it? Over the midweek, when this was discussed on the overlap. So they had Paul Scholes, Jill Scott, Roy Keane, and Ian Wright, and they were discussing about Marcus Rashford and Casemiro going to the US, right? And when they had a 5 day break given to them by their club, in terms of whether or not that was the right thing to do. Now, what I would say is when you watch the clip on the overlap, and I try and catch the overlap where I can, um, the conversation actually did go slightly longer than I had anticipated. I mean, I thought, okay, it's an interesting topic, but they did discuss it at length, which I thought was fascinating. Look, we'll cover what Ruben Amorim had to say about it because Gary Neville conducted an interview with him as well, which we'll speak about briefly. But just on the break itself, Gary Neville's point, Ayub, was that given the current, I think what he was getting at was given the current state of where Manchester United are today in terms of being 13th in the Premier League, obviously just managers just got sacked, the new managers coming in after a couple of games handled by Ruud van Nistelrooy. So it's his first league game, international break. Gary Neville's point was that perhaps you may wish to lay low. Now, Marcus Rashford was in New York, I believe, or in Brooklyn. I think he went to an NBA game between the Brooklyn Nets and the New York Knicks, seen swapping shirts with Jalen Brunson and tweeting all about it and sharing pictures, I believe, on various different social media channels. Casemiro, I think, also went to Orlando with his family, I believe, to Disney World. Now, look, I think Gary Neville was getting at is it's just not a good look, perhaps when your team's suffering. Your manager's just got sacked, that you're seen. I think it's more the perception of being out there and having a good old time. His key other point was the risk of jet lag. It's a long flight, given the relative short turnaround to getting back to United training. You would consider that was perhaps not the best look. So I think Neville was covering a few points. Now, he spoke about obviously in his day, this definitely wouldn't have happened, although there's a really funny part in the overlap where Gary Neville speaks about where if you're positioned 14th in the league, and he makes a mistake because they're currently 13th, but he says if you're positioned 14th in the league, and he says to Roy Keane, imagine if we were 14th in the league, to which Roy Keane playfully responds, yeah, but we wouldn't be effing 14th in the league, would we? So, and it's just a really funny moment, actually. But no, look, I think the point's well taken. I'm not quite sure what Gary Neville wants the players to do. It's a different age, it's a different era. Do I think it's a smart choice when your team's suffering a little bit to be seen, to be kind of out there having a good old time? You've still got to get on with it. You've still got to lead your life. I agree. You might want to be a little bit more smart with your decisions. I'm not sure how appropriate the reasoning is about the whole jet lag nowadays. You're flying kind of first class or private jets and all the rest of it. They're well taken, looked after. So I didn't have too much of an issue. I guess the challenge becomes is that when you then perhaps may come back and not perform so well, you may be giving what is currently a disgruntled fan base. Yes, a little bit rejuvenated with the appointment of the young manager, and that always gives the whole club a lift when you think, okay, cool, we can go places with this new manager. But you can imagine if Marcus Rashford doesn't play so well against Ipswich or Casemiro doesn't play so well against Ipswich at the weekend, that you're kind of bringing some scrutiny onto yourselves, perhaps for no reason, right? Now Marcus Rashford has been labeled a bit of an issue recently in recent times. You've been obviously quite vociferous in your criticism of Marcus Rashford. He doesn't make consistently good decisions, I would say, anyway, off the field. He's had a few issues. Yes, of course, he does some of the great things off the field, which he should be noted for. But what I'm saying is, there have been times, you remember, he was once late for training, I think away to Wolves, came off the bench to make the winning contributions. He's had a few other run-ins. I think there was the incident in Belfast, or he'd been out drinking a party and was late for training or something earlier this year or last year. Anyway, the point is he's had a few run-ins, and when your stock's low, and it has been for Rashford in terms of form, performance, and let's say equity with the fans, you just want to be maybe mindful of how it seems. Especially how he's coming across. So he's putting a bit of a lays on his back, so to speak, in terms of the eye of the fans. So, look, I understand where Neville was coming from. I really do, because I also want my players to be relatively responsible. And when things are not going so well, I think you just want to be a little smarter, perhaps with your decisions. Go away, go with the family, perhaps maybe not to the most high profile of locations. Yeah, the jet lag, again, I'm not so sure. You'd have to look at this scientifically. We'll get into what Ruben Amorim spoke about it, because Gary Neville did ask him about it point blank. But overall, I didn't have too much of an issue with what they did, although I can kind of see where Gary Neville was also coming from, because again, it's about the context, the time in question. United are struggling. It's their worst start in the league for many, many a year. It's led to the manager losing his job. I don't know if the optics are good that some of your leading players, especially some of your more experienced players, and Marcus Rashford is one of their most experienced players, irrespective of what is still, hopefully, he should have many more years in the game. Still one of the most experienced players in that club in terms of games played. You'd expect just there to be a little bit more smart. Look, Casemiro, I think, what's going away with the family. You may argue that somebody who's in his advanced stage of his career, I don't know how the jet lag again will affect him. So time will tell. But I took his point. But again, I also don't see it as a massive issue in isolation, but I can take the point that if your club's struggling, you might just want to make some smarter choices about how you get away, how you rest and recover, to be honest.
I mean, I think you're hitting the nail on the head in terms of travel these days. Players these days, they travel in first class or business class, and it's the 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 comfort that you have. I mean, as I said, I mean, you know that I've been fortunate to travel business class a couple of times.
As you
And the
often,
difference,
as you
I'm
remind us
trying to be
every three
humble here.
weeks.
But the difference is, I mean, I an 8 hour flight. I honestly, I could have done double that, and I would have felt as fresh as a daisy because you are so comfortable. And this is business class now. I mean, these players can afford first class, which is a step up, a notch up from business class. And if business class is quality, God knows what first class is. And I mean, I've seen videos on YouTube, and it's ridiculous. I mean, if you suffer from jet lag after traveling first class, then really there's no help for you. So I don't think that's an issue. I think Gary Neville is old school, but in the nicest way, in the best way, because he was a winner. I mean, and he's always said that he wasn't the best of footballers, but he made the absolute best of what he had. But that was through hard work, endeavor, always commitment. He always was very, very committed to the cause. And I think maybe this was perhaps my only criticism is if you're, and you've alluded to it, if you're in a bad run, especially in this day and age, this is an age of where it's like you fart and somebody's going to publicize it and sort of broadcast it. So really, you've just got to be smart. I mean, Rashford, I expect him to do stupid things because to me, he's not the brightest spark. Casemiro, I would have expected. He's obviously a little bit more advanced in years, but again, he's gone with his family, and we'll talk about what Amorim said. But the club said you've got 5 days off. There's no restrictions. So at the end of the day, can you blame the players? Because, but maybe this is where Gary Neville has that issue because players manage themselves. That was the difference, and that's perhaps where the issue is. That do you need to be? I mean, you're adults, but act like adults then. make the right choices, make the right decisions. And I don't think they did, uh, bearing in mind what's happened with that famous football club.
Yeah, I think look, just drilling down deeper, you're right. Gary Neville spoke about a lot about his day, and let's try and be very mature in how the angle he was coming from. I'm with you. I think he did have good intentions in terms of what he was saying. He wasn't simply blasting the players, even though Ian Wright, Roy Keane, and Paul Scholes were ridiculing him. Think because he kept protesting, saying, "I'm not having a go at them," but he seemed like he was having a go at them. So, look, I think the idea was that look, it's perhaps not the smartest decision. Now, look, if I can just speak subjectively for myself, rightly or wrongly, when your team's in a bad run, which Manchester United have been this season, then it's true. It would probably make me feel a certain type of way, and maybe that's reflective of my views on football and how people should care and people how players should behave. Maybe so. Maybe I'm right. Maybe I'm wrong. But subjectively speaking, I'm not saying I want to see my players suffer and kind of go into a retreat of darkness for 2 weeks and say, right, that's I'm just gonna kind of not be seen. But you might want to hear more stories about, players. Yeah, get a few days away, no issues. Keep a low profile. Nobody's suggesting don't. But maybe I don't know, like get back early and get back into training and show the new manager that you're at it and you're going to be ready for him in terms of the first game and again, I'm not saying that should be a staple because that is an exception. If the club's giving you 5 days off, which Ruben Amorim confirmed, then fine, take the 5 days off. But even still, perhaps subjectively, as a supporter of a football club that might be in a bad run, I'd like to hear more stories just to give me the enthusiasm and confidence that actually there are efforts being made to try and rectify this run to arrest the slide that Manchester United have been on. Again, that's just maybe going to make me feel a little bit more warmer inside. Again, it's not a huge issue because I think Amorim spoke about it quite well actually in terms of deflecting any, let's say, culpability from the players. And maybe internally he sees it a little bit differently, but at least from a spokesman perspective, he handled that issue, I thought, very, very well. But again, I think you're right, Marcus Rashford, and maybe in this day and age, this is vast, vast amount of wealth that these players have got. They're getting paid an ungodly amount of money a week, especially those two players. I think they will be in the top three top earners at that football club, maybe along with Bruno. I don't know the finances, but I'm pretty sure that would be the case when you think about it. And I have to imagine, you've got hanger-ons and not so much Casemiro because he went with his family, but what I mean is when you think about Rashford, he's got an entourage, I'm sure, and he's got people involved in his day-to-day business dealings, and he's got a bit of time off because currently he's not good enough to be playing for England. So he's getting time off, and they're probably thinking, let's go for a nice jolly up for a couple of days. So be it. This is the modern play in some respects. Let's see how it comes. But you're right. I mean, again, when they play against Ipswich, if there's a few poor performances, especially from those two players, you can just imagine a lot of fans will be saying, well, sometimes 1 plus 1 it does equal 2. So there you go.
Yeah, I mean, this is the problem, I suppose, that you create for yourself now because it's got publicity, so therefore there's an added pressure. Just on a quick flip side to this, or a slightly different tangent. I remember, I mean, Gary Sober's way before my time, even my time, but great cricketer. But he used to love the nightlife. But I mean, he was an amazing player. If you look at his record, amazing player. But what he always said was he'd go out. I mean, he'd be out till 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, and he'd be batting the following day. But he almost put that pressure upon himself that he knows that, right, okay, everybody's going to think that, right, if I fail. So he actually was able to turn it round. But this was a genius and he performed. And maybe, I don't know, maybe this perhaps might be for both Casemiro and Rashford. Right, the eyes are on us. Let's see what we're made of. But football is in this modern age, it's such an intense game that I think your body needs rest and recuperation. And maybe that's perhaps where I would be looking at that. Look, it's a demanding season. You're not playing great. So maybe what you need to do is make sure that you rest well. So every time that you put on the shirt and you're playing at a high intensity. But right, I've alluded to Amorim a few times during this opening segment. And he did an interview. I thought it was an excellent interview. I actually didn't know. I didn't know that he'd done the interview. You told me about it. I watched about sort of 15 minutes of it. Excellent, excellent. He came across really, really well. But you could maybe sort of expand on some of the things that he said and what impressed you about Amorim, uh, uh, the man and potentially the coach now.
Yeah, I mean, look, I thought it was quite an incredible interview, actually, in terms of first impressions. This is the first major soundbite that Manchester United fans will hear from Ruben Amorim. It was an extended piece. It was an interview for over 20 minutes, a sit-down interview with Gary Neville. And if I was a Manchester United fan, I would be very enthused. Look, I'm normally very reserved, very conservative. You win games by consistently improving over time, building a foundation, building a consistent culture. And over time, if you build those things and the foundations are good, performances should lead to consistent results over time. It takes time, given that the rot at Manchester United, I would argue, is quite steep. But I genuinely believe this might be the best decision that Manchester United have taken since the Sir Alex Ferguson days. I really do. No appointment, no decision at Manchester United since the Sir Alex Ferguson days has enthused me as much as I was listening to this interview. And you might say, well, you're putting a lot of stock into this one sit down interview. But there were various aspects of the interview that told me that he gets it. That's the first thing. So I'm
Yeah.
always thinking, does the manager get what the issues are and how he's thinking about addressing it? What I found was, A, he was incredibly personable, speaks English, obviously, incredibly eloquently. Had a slightly awkward exchange with a Sky Sports reporter, I believe, the other day when he was coaching for Sporting, where he kept insisting that he answers the question with English, and it actually got quite awkward at the end, to be fair. And he spoke incredibly well. What I loved the absolute most in his sit-down interview with Gary Neville was he was very humble about certain things within the interview as well, suggesting that, look, I don't necessarily saying I've got the answers here or I know best. Look, I'm being very open. There's some things I'll have to learn massively. Maybe I learned that actually my way isn't the right way. He spoke about how Gary Neville, in his time, and he was just not necessarily putting words in Gary Neville's mouth, but he was saying how, oh, I imagine perhaps this is how you felt. So very humble in terms of his approach, not being arrogant to just suggest as though he knew the answers from what Gary Neville would have gone through in his time in the 90s and beyond, winning titles, or in 2000s and beyond, winning titles with Manchester United. So he was very smart about the way he articulated certain things. But even when he was asked questions about, okay, what's this one idea about? He was speaking about how he mentions in detail about what he sees as his one idea of how to play football. He talks about how players need to understand if the ball's in this particular part of the pitch or in this particular part of the pitch, where each individual entity, each individual member of that football pitch should know exactly where they need to be, what they need to do. And he was talking about a cohesive team thought and team cohesion about how we go about pressing and what we all need to do as an entity. One of the biggest uh, uh, accusations, so to speak, of the biggest failings of Manchester United in recent times has been that they play very individualistic football. They rely on moments of brilliance, and because they don't have a stock way of playing, a staple way of playing, that often leads them into great troubles because they don't have any consistent patterns. They don't know how to get up the pitch consistently in coordinated patterns so that you can overwhelm teams. It's all very individualistic. And I think that's a fair accusation to level at them. And he speaks about this. He says, look, we lose the ball, we win the ball. We lose the ball, we win the ball. It's not a consistent way to play football. So I thought all of the points he was asked about, I found that his answers were not woolly, which is often what you get. Sometimes you listen to a manager and you think, okay, he spoke for about 2.5 minutes. What did he actually tell me? And I thought with Ruben Amorim, he was quite concise with how he's going to try and rectify. He did not shy away from the fact that the expectation of Manchester United is to win football games. He did not shy away from the fact that he feels he's got the right tools, but he did so in a very humble way, which makes me think he's actually going to get his message across. He won't be as abrasive. And I thought just very quickly, we touched on the point about Rashford and Casemiro. When he speaks so well. And he said, look, uh, he says that, look, the club gave 5 days off. So they're grown ups, they've got kids, they've got to do what they've got to do. Now, what he was hinting at is maybe the club shouldn't have given 5 days. And he says as much when Gary Neville follows up. And he said, look, 5 days
Yeah.
is a bit too much because after 3 days, you lose something in terms of athleticism, rhythm. Mikel Arteta was asked something similar about Rice and Saka today, and he said, "Look, great, they were injured, or they are still injured. I expect both to play tomorrow." But he says that actually I prefer them to be in some rhythm. Jurgen Klopp was actually very similar as well in his time at Liverpool. He preferred the game every 3, 4 days because it kept players sharp in terms of athleticism. They didn't get sluggish. So I just thought, in terms of his interview, I was incredibly impressed. Now, again, many people might say, okay, it's an interview, relax, you don't need to go too far. But I genuinely think Manchester United fans now have a coach who's going to bring a modern style of football. Are there going to be huge issues in the short term? Yes, I actually think that over time, even in the short term, you might think, well, actually, what's he bringing? But I for one, will not be judging him in the short term. I may not even judge him next year. What I'll be looking for though is just some consistent shoots of progress because to weed out some of the rot, if the rot's taken so much time to set in, you can't just turn it around. So I don't believe so much in the you're only 4 points behind top four, so ooh, maybe a quick turnaround. You get it for me, and he answered this question very well as well. He said that'll be fool's gold. Like we're not talking about top four, we're not talking about positions. My goal is to win the next game. So I think he knows he has the confidence in his abilities to get Manchester United back to where they need to be, which is, as always, challenging for the Premier League title. But just the way he spoke, I think if I was a Manchester United fan, I would feel, oh, this guy's got the charisma, but he's also got the humility to get his message across, to connect with the players, to have enough respect, even though he's a very young chap, have enough respect or substance within him so that the players will respect him and will listen to him. But also then having the humility to get that message across. And one last point before I finish, Ayub, he spoke about all of the different key personnels within the Manchester United structure. He talks about Dave Brailsford's previous history in cycling and how he talks about bringing a culture to the club. He speaks about Dan Ashworth in glowing terms, and he said that look, the good thing about Dan Ashworth is that he's going to be somebody, and it's so important, who's going to be consistently giving the same message to footballers that they will be hearing from myself, which means that when they get that consistent messaging, even if they're going to their agents and potentially complaining, the agents will still also receive that same message from Dan Ashworth. So he was talking about being a united front, to be consistent with the messaging, to have the full support of him. So I just thought just the way he spoke, the points he covered, again, in ultimately what is his second language. Of course, he spent a bit of time here studying as well in his former years, but it was just for me, if I was Manchester United fan, I would be quite again enthusiastic and confident, and I wouldn't judge him too early. Again, and that's good or bad. You may get a couple of good results and think, oh, has he turned it around? I won't be one of those either. I just think he's got enough about him that he knows what needs to be done. It'll take a bit of time, maybe a few windows, and again, he'll have to get some of his own players in to kind of understand the messaging that he's got. But I genuinely think this perhaps may well be the single best decision, and not only that, maybe the best moment to be a Manchester United fan since the Sir Alex Ferguson days, and that was over a decade ago. But I really think that this man could be the one to get them back to where they belong, which is challenging. I didn't say winning, but challenging for the Premier League title. So, yeah, a good day for Man United, irrespective of how the rest of this season ends. I'm quietly confident that he will be able to get them back to the big time.
I think you're dead right. I think you're dead right. I mean, I did watch, as I said, I didn't watch the whole interview, about 15, 16 minutes, but I watched enough to be hugely impressed. Very, very impressive character. And he wasn't just spewing empty platitudes. There was a lot of substance behind what he was saying. There was a great deal of clarity. Uh, he knew exactly what he wants, what his style is, what his philosophy is, and there's a stern character as well. Because when they were talking about the 5 days and the escapades and all that kind of stuff, he said, "Well, look, that's what the club decide, but going forward, it's going to be different." I mean, that's basically what he was sort of saying, and he did sort of say that, look, if players doing what he's expected to do, I will back him to the hill. If they're not doing what they're expected, I'll have a word. And bearing in mind, this is a 38-year-old, 37, 38-year-old, a very young manager, still in his infancy, but I think he's got a supreme belief in his own ability. He's got some great ideas, and he was very, very engaging. And he was somebody that I think, I mean, we talk about lots of managers. Sometimes they'll say a lot of things, but they won't really say anything. Uh, he certainly gives me that impression that United have finally found. I mean, they've been looking for a long, long time, and they've had some big names. But uh, what I got from Amorim was a guy who is absolutely clear. He knows what he wants. He knows how to implement his ideas, and that's the key as well. It's not just a case of right, this is what I want to do. He's aware of how to try and instill his ideas. He was smart enough to be uh, uh, practical and say, well, look, it's not going to happen overnight. But I can't wait. I can't wait to see him start to introduce his ideas. Uh, I think if Sporting Lisbon is anything to go by, I think United fans should be in for an exciting time. And I like that that his vision about if the ball is here, uh, somebody over there should know. And I know what he was trying to say,
Yeah.
that it's about singing from the same hymn sheet. There's a commonality. And I think it's something. If I was a professional player for United, I'd be excited. I'd be really excited by this guy. He's charismatic. He's engaging. I don't think he's going to take any prisoners. I think he's somebody that is exactly what United need. And I've got a feeling that if somebody isn't towing the party line, I don't think he'll have any hesitation to say, right, if you don't want to be part of this journey, on your way. It doesn't matter who it is, uh, whether it's Rashford, Casemiro, whether it's Bruno Fernandes. I don't think so, because I think Bruno, Portuguese connection. I think they've had some previous history together, positive history together. So I think these are exciting times, really exciting times for United.
Yeah, fully agreed, fully aligned. Honestly, I was really impressed with the interview. A couple of more points and tidbits from the interview. He speaks about how ultimately Gary Neville and his like will judge him rightly in terms of the position that Manchester United finish in this season. But he leans in and says, "I don't care." Which I thought was really lovely. It was kind of missed in the kind of interview, but it's a kind of a no, it wasn't even arrogance. He said it with just this confidence in himself to say, "Look, I don't care what you actually how you judge me." The interview was this wonderful balance between having, to your point, confidence in his own abilities, and he said very clearly, and again, I absolutely love this, given that it's his second language. He speaks about how I've got immense confidence, but please don't mistake my kind of happiness for landing this role and being here with naivety. And I thought I love that because he
Yeah,
knows that
yeah. Mm.
if he just smiles and talks about all the wonderful things that he's going to do, a lot of people are going to look at it because such is the world nowadays. That they're going to look at it with some cynicism and say, "Oh, wait till you find out once they have a few more games and see what these players are about. You'll start to see what life's like at Manchester United in terms of perhaps a turn for the worse." So he kind of put it out there. Look, I'm not naive. I know what the issues are. But again, he sounded confident. Again, charisma. I think fans want a manager with charisma who's got ideas, but who's also got that wonderful balance of the humility that he speaks about as well. Again, one other aspect that he covers in the interview is about how the recovery runs and how he was asked, okay, how do you want Manchester United to look? What's your typical Manchester United player? And he talked about how he said, I want athletes. He said, if you look at all the statistics,
Yeah.
he's mentioned during this part of the interview about data. He said, I'm not having a go. It's not about being thin. These are the words he used. He said, it's not
Yeah,
about being
yeah, yeah.
thin. He said, it's about, if you look at the data, if you want to have those kind of intense runs over short distances, you've got to become incredible athletes. I think what he's
Yeah.
hinting at is these players better get ready for some
Yeah.
intense training sessions. And if it doesn't work for these players, he'll soon be building a team and a squad capable of playing that because I think that's a key part of the way he wants to play. So, irrespective, I can just I can visualize already day one what a Ruben Amorim team would look like under ideal circumstances. And if he's given me that type of clarity, I can only imagine the consistent messages he's going to be giving to not just these players, but future iteration of this squad, because ultimately, a fully functioning Ruben Amorim team is probably far removed from the personnel that you see today. So, a positive day for Man United, irrespective of what happens at the weekend. One swallow doesn't make a summer. I think this is going to be a slow burner to some extent because it's going to take time. There's no quick fix, especially when bad habits have been formed. Remember, Manchester United still, in my opinion, play very individualistic football. He's going to play them into a different system, so that'll take some time getting used to. But I'm pretty confident that once he's had a half a year at least, maybe even till the end of next year, to start forming a team in his own look and feel and identity, I really do think that this team has, or should I say, a team under his management has the opportunity and has the ability to knock on that door again, which Manchester United have not been part of in terms of that conversation since the Sir Alex Ferguson days. So yeah, thoroughly impressed, very enthused, and I think if I'm a Manchester United fan, I'm feeling a little bit happier than I was maybe a couple of weeks ago as to where Manchester United are headed, to be honest.
Absolutely agree. Theatre of dreams will be lit up. I'm absolutely sure of. Right. From one side of Manchester to the other side of Manchester. Guardiola, uh, bit of a surprise. I honestly thought that I we weren't going to see him next season, but he signed, I think, for 2 years. So I wonder what to be. I've got to be honest. I mean, he's been here for a long, long time. I'm not sure how long he usually stays at a club, but it looks as if he's he's had his stint, and he was probably either going to have a break or opportunity elsewhere. But he's committed for 2 more years. So, what's your thoughts on that? What do you reckon the reason is? Committed 2 more years? Is it because of Slot and Amorim? He's excited to do battle with them.
How about Mikel Arteta? You just gonna like, oh, just skipped him already, have you?
He's he's already dealt with him, so he doesn't need to
Ooh.
bother with him anymore.
Touche, touche. All good. I mean, yeah, absolutely. I am surprised. Like yourself, I thought there was a good chance that this was going to be his last year. And Ayub, he admitted as much in during his soundbite for when he signed the contract. Look, I'm going to keep this relatively short and sweet. This is the longest that he has been, I think, a manager of a football club. I think he's going to be, if he serves this contract out, I think it's going to be a decade or so. Again, I'll have to check the years and statistics. Seems just yesterday when he joined, but he's been there for a number of years. Look, it could still well be the case that next year is his last year. Let's see, he still does things on a year by year basis, pretty much irrespective of what the contract says. What was interesting to me is, first, I'll tell you what I thought was interesting, but second, what my own sentiments are. First, I just thought it was interesting that this current skid of results seems to have played actually quite a large part in him staying. It seems to have been quite an emotional decision. He spoke about it on a few occasions that now wasn't the time, that now was the time that the club actually deserved for him to kind of show his commitment. So I think actually the wobble that they've currently been on, and it has been a wobble by their extremely high standards, is one that he now seems kind of rejuvenated about and says, well, kind of a will show them attitude. I'm staying. That'll hopefully give the club a little bit of stability and a bit of a boost. Let this season not just peter out with me perhaps lacking a little bit of energy and kind of gung ho. Remember, they've won everything there is to win at the club. Perhaps one more Champions League would be the cherry on the cake. But it felt like this season had the early kind of makings of a season that not was going to peter out. They're a class outfit, may well win the title again. But just there were some signs, weren't there? We spoke about Guardiola, we spoke about De Bruyne, the links to Saudi Arabia. He's been injured this season. The off form of some of these critical players, Ford and maybe even Silva, Grealish hasn't played much of a part this season. Allen's been, I say hit and miss. He's still hit when he hits big. But it felt like this season had a narrative about it. We spoke about the off-field issues with the Premier League charges as well. So I just felt it felt like an emotional decision with some of the pressure on Man City, the scrutiny right now with the off-the-field case, with the charges, with the current skid of results, with this idea that, oh, maybe to your point, maybe it did kind of get his juices going. The fact that Arne Slot's come in, Liverpool are doing incredibly well, and Man City are struggling. So maybe that was the little fillip that he needed to say, let's go, we can do this. So I feel like there was a certain case of our backs are against the wall. I'm going to show him a fighter type attitude to him signing this contract extension. I really do think that this current results played a part. On a personal sentiment, just very quickly, Ayub, I'm pleased simply because if I want my team to be challenging and potentially one day winning the Premier League title, be it this year, next year, or the year after, if that's the conversation we as Arsenal fans want to be a part of, I want to do it whilst Pep Guardiola's coach of Man City, because ultimately, in my opinion, not all glories and titles are made equal. I do think that the level of competition, the manager that you go up against, it all matters. It's one of the reasons why I'm very kind of empathetic to how Jurgen Klopp is seen. A lot of people talk about, oh, he's won Premier League title enough. For a manager to be considered a legend is one Champions League enough for him to be considered, which I can never understand, to be honest, because some of his very, very, very close shortcomings in terms of coming second require context. So I do think overcoming a Pep Guardiola-led Man City means more. It really does. So that's just from a competition perspective. That's just being up for the fight, being up for the challenge. So I can only speak subjectively. I'm quite pleased actually that he will be staying. It gives Arsenal a chance to overcome that level of team because a Pep Guardiola team is always going to be kind of there or thereabouts. So pleased, a little bit surprised to your point, but also it seems that it was in some ways a little bit of an emotional decision. And I guess there's nothing wrong with that from time to time as well.
Yeah, I'd be intrigued to actually find out what the reasons were. I mean, you say it could be on the back of these four wins or four losses, but I don't know. I mean, he's far too experienced to make a decision or to commit purely based on emotion. But it'll be interesting to find out. But I certainly sort of think that the arrival of Slot, arrival of Amorim, because even for managers as well. I mean, I think obviously the competition and the battles he had with Klopp were exciting, with Arteta as well. So I'm sure managers as well like to go head to head as well. So I'm sure that these two new managers, who obviously come with a great reputation, are doing well. Obviously, Amorim is not taking charge yet, but Slot has fantastic start. So certainly he's placed his marker down. So maybe that's just sort of say, right, okay, new kid on the block. I'm the old master. Let me sort of teach you a thing or two. So it could be that, and I hope it is that because I like that because I like not just from players but from managers as well that it's not just about managing a club, but there's personal rivalries and competition as well, which just adds to the drama.
Yeah, absolutely. Adds to the story, adds to the narrative. And we've spoken about this offline at you many a times. One of the reasons why at least I love sport and you love sport is because of the stories, the competition, the narratives, the drama. Sport is a business, and business you need characters and stories. You're right. I mean, you can think about the good old Super Sundays back in the day with Sir Alex Ferguson and Kevin Keegan going at it. Then you think about kind of Wenger, Mourinho kind of clashes, and even,
Yeah,
and, e-
yeah,
and even Ferguson and Wenger in their good old days. There was this kind of angst, Benitez and Mourinho in the
yeah.
Champions League going at it time and time again. You always need. You're right. As much as the players and ultimately the players produce the product on the pitch, you need storylines. You need a little bit of angst. You need a little bit of sometimes a little bit of needle. That's what makes the game great. It doesn't mean one person's bad or who's right and who's wrong. That all is part of the plot. That's part of the story. That's what brings eyeballs to the competition. So look, Pep Guardiola, one of the best in the business, if not the very best in the business. Present company included might disagree. Uh, but yeah, you need that in the Premier League. And again, from a very selfish point of view, I'm pleased that he's staying because, again, that's the level of competition that you want to go up against, and that's what football at the highest level, sport at the highest level, is all about.
Yeah, great news for the Premier League. I mean, I do criticise Guardiola every now and then, but I think he's a fabulous, fabulous personality, and I think he is a great coach of great players. I always add that caveat of great players. Right, just before we finish off, you wanted to include this topic. It's a story that's been rumbling, and it's resulted now in I think a 7 game ban for Bentancur of Spurs who I've got to be honest, I'm quite ignorant of this story. I know there's obviously some racial insult or abuse towards Son. I'm not. That's all I know. So uh, I'm sure there's some viewers as well who probably are aware of the story, but not the details. So maybe you could outline the story and what your thoughts are on what's happened.
Yeah, look, it was quite an important story because it broke this week that Rodrigo Bentancur will be banned for 7 domestic games, and faced £100,000 fine from the FA. What was it regarding? He gave an interview, I think I don't want to get it wrong, but I think at least in Uruguay, whether it was with Uruguayan TV or radio, I'm not so sure, regarding somebody asking for a Tottenham shirt, and he asked him, which shirt would you want? And he said Sonny's, and he said, is it Sonny's or Sonny's cousin? Because they all look like the same. This was kind of word for word verbatim what the translation or what have you. Look, he gave the interview in September. He was charged duly there afterwards, and it's been obviously confirmed as of now that he's got this 7 game domestic ban, so will affect. He'll miss some big games, not just in the Premier League, but also I think a Carabao Cup semi-final against Manchester United as well. Look, just to give you a little bit more context, him and Heung-min Son had a conversation. He apologized to Heung-min Son. Son defended him as well, said, "Look, he's a player I love," and he was very apologetic. Was close to tears in his apology and what have you, his personal apology to Heung-min Son, and for Son, that was the end of the matter. Look, it's a very sensitive topic. Anytime there's any utterances that can be interpreted for sure as racial ignorance or what have you, or xenophobia, whatever, however you want to class it. Of course, we all look at that, but I always say each case is unique in its own merits. If I may say, you can have situations where there's certain, let's say, racial utterances or ignorant utterances which are demeaning, let's say, said in spite, and what have you. And I always feel that you have to judge again each individual case on its merits. Do I think it was a stupid thing to do? I do. I think you should steer clear of such comments. We know these kind of prejudices exist, and some may argue that you've got to be very heavy-handed because you want to root out all types of ignorances out. And I can understand that to some extent. My issue is, well, how we do it, and how we go about educating people. If you want to just simply banish them, and kind of plug them to one side. If you remember, I was saying, I know it's a very different context, but we spoke about Ivan Toney with his gambling ban. I was very strong on he should have been banned for a lot longer, but he should also be allowed to then continue because that's how it should work. He should be banned and then punished and then allowed to continue. The thing about Rodrigo Bentancur, just to be very clear, in my opinion, is has he been stupid? Yes. Has he said something that deserved punishment? For sure. But I think the issue that I have, and it's very difficult to articulate, is that the authorities consider themselves or make some arbitrary decisions as to how heavy-handed or perhaps not heavy-handed that they wish to be, depending on how it's perhaps going to appear. The fact that he gave this interview and that it came out that it's on, let's say, on TV or what have you, I often wonder what the intent is behind some of these bans and punishments and what have you. It's a case of, oh, it's put us in a bit of a negative light, this or the spotlight's on us to be seen to be taking some sort of serious measure. And based on that, they will then hand out such what I would consider is quite a hefty ban, to be honest with you. 7 games for what was, and he said it in a playful way. Of course, is it ignorant? Yes. Are they racial undertones? Of course, I'm not hiding behind that. But I do often wonder, and again, this is my key point about the origins and the intents behind such punishments. It's always often, I find, a way to placate certain, not I wouldn't say lobbying groups or what have you, or certain groups within the game. It's a case of, oh, we've got to be seen to be cracking down on this type of thing. So let's mete out a 7 game ban and £100,000 punishment. Now, look, he's been stupid. He's been foolish. Nobody's disputing that. I think he's accepted that, and Tottenham have appealed the extent of the punishment. They've not appealed the punishment itself because they said, look, he deserves to be punished. They won't be fining him themselves. But it sits uncomfortably with me that I don't think these are decisions necessarily taken that are befitting the crime committed. This is often punishments handed out because, ooh, this one we can get away with, so we perhaps won't be as strong in this particular punishment. But because this one's come out and is now in the public glare, we've now got to come across a little bit more heavy-handed, a bit more strong. Again, my view is he's not said it with ill intent. Ignorance, yes. Stupidity for sure. But has he said it with a view to being super demeaning and kind of, uh, really being quite downright disrespectful? Yeah, maybe disrespectful as well. I'll give you that. But I just don't think he's meant it in a real spiteful, in a way that's kind of entrenched in any hatred or anything like this. So I just don't think the punishment did fit the crime. I thought the punishment was way too strong, in my opinion. I think maybe 3, maybe 4 games was sufficient. I'm not sure what the level is, but 7 games at £100,000 fine. seems for me way too strong. Even though I acknowledge for sure, yes, we have to root this out at all levels. I mean, respect for all and accepting people as you find them. And we know there's certain topics that you between you and I that you have to steer clear on. You've got to be pretty polished on, right? Especially when you're going in front of
Mm.
a microphone and what have you. So, look, he's been stupid, but for him to miss some critical games off the back of a comment he made, which I think he got carried away a little bit. And again, the player in question, it wasn't just Heung-min Son that I guess, insulted. I guess anyone can take offense to what he said. But I don't think he meant it in the way that, again, that was entrenched in any real kind of hate or deep downright disrespect for an entire nation or anything like this. So again, difficult subject to articulate yourself on, but I did think this punishment was a little too harsh, personally.
It's a difficult one because we live in. I mean, it's a strange time that live in because you can commit a genocide and justify it, but then a small comment can be made and for 7 games it's a ban. So it's a strange time. There was a friend of mine once sort of said banter is dead. I'm a great one on banter, and I have friends various nationalities, ethnicities, and we've had a great deal of banter where we've poked fun at each other's culture, but it's never from a point of malice. Now, that's the difference. In a sense, if you're with uh, people from different ethnic backgrounds and you're all getting on, you're all having a good laugh, it's probably okay. It's certainly, in my opinion, it's okay. But if you're in Uruguay, there's nobody of South Korean heritage there, and you've made that comment. Maybe it's a little bit ill-conceived to sort of say that. But really, what I would have liked is that for Son to come out and say, "Look, he's made a comment. Look, I know exactly what this chap is all about. There's not a racist bone in his body. Uh, People are making a mountain out of a molehill. There are far more serious issues in the world that are happening that people are not saying anything about. So let's get it into perspective. I would have wanted Son to perhaps do that, and to not sort of say, look, there's not to sort of say racism isn't an issue, but this wasn't racism. This was a little bit of banter. Maybe he sort of said it at the wrong time, but certainly there's no malice intent. I have no problem with it. If I have no problem with it, then nobody else should.
I think that would have been quite the powerful statement of you. It's interesting. I wonder whether or not there was some, I don't want to say pressure, because by all intents and purposes, Heung-min Son did accept the apology. Whether or not publicly he feels a different way, who knows? But I could imagine like a powerful statement made publicly, maybe because the case was still being heard. Players are maybe handcuffed in terms of what they can and cannot say, because you're right, that probably would have at least put the FA in a very difficult position because that would have put them on the back foot in terms of what they can and can't do. So I have to think he was. I don't want to say like he was. I get the sense that he wasn't really allowed to say much. Maybe perhaps behind closed doors because there was probably a hearing and what have you. Maybe he did make his submissions that look, come on, I don't think it's necessarily all that critical. I just think think about this. I mean, he gave an interview. Somebody's asking for a Tottenham shirt, so it's done in a playful way. He's talking about something nice. He says Sonny's, and the fact that one utterance like that actually then leads to Spurs being penalised, the player being penalised. He misses critical games, which and the manager's under a little bit of pressure. He's going into a game against Man City, and he's got some tough games. He's got Carabao Cup semi-final, which he's obviously going to miss, I believe. So what I mean is, it's look where the episode started and look where the episode's ended. I mean,
Yeah.
it's. I mean, some would say self-inflicted, and many will have a good laugh at Spurs' expense, saying this is typical Spurs. But I just think to myself, it's really disappointing that this is what's happened. I think what could have happened is where he's perhaps not lost the ability to play for Spurs because that just only hurts Spurs. And if he is a good character and if he is somebody to your point, and again you use the word malice, and you're right, there was by all intents and purposes no malice because Son at least who would know him better than anyone, having
Mm.
being his captain and having been in that squad for a number of years now together, you just feel as though there was perhaps another way to punish him. and I would have preferred more down the education route. And I think that's still something part of his punishment anyway, but perhaps something that could have happened at the end of the season. Yeah, fine him, fine, but an education program or something like this, I'm not sure he had to. It had to result in games and a significant game ban. And the problem you then have, Ayub, is you get into the semantics of, well, we give 3 games for violent conduct, so it's got to be more than 3 games. So I'm sure they've got,
Mm.
um, let's say, kind of guidelines as to punishments and what criteria they fall into and what punishments can be meted out. I think that's all in agreement with the PFA anyway. So to keep some strict guidelines so you don't just get somebody dishing out crazy bans. But again, Spurs have appealed it. Maybe this is how it goes on appeal. They'll get it down to 4 games. I have no idea. But just for me, on a personal level, rightly or wrongly, it's just a very subjective thought. I think there was a different way, and I just think 7 games for what was said in what was said as a bad joke, if I may say, didn't deserve that type of punishment, in my opinion.
It's quite ridiculous. I mean, my final word is it's ridiculous. And as I said, it's I it, it I view football not in isolation, but what's happening in the world. So therefore, I put a certain context. And to me, there are unbelievable horrors happening in the world, and no real repercussions. So this, to me, if it was no malice, okay, don't do it again. Or even if he does it again, it doesn't matter. I think, do you know, that's the way that I am at the moment. If Son had to come out and said, look, he's not racist, end of, move on, forget it. Uh, so I don't know. I mean, if he said it, then I've certainly not heard it. But that would be my view. This is absolutely it's nonsensical to me. The severity of the punishment for what basically is at worst it's ill-advised, but this is the world that we live in. So on that note, I think we should call it a day and try and sort of see if we can enjoy our weekend now.
Well, we can enjoy our weekends. This is normally the part of the show where you indulge us for a minute and a half regarding where Leeds are, who they're playing, who you think, what do you think is going to happen, and then you have a very subtle, not so subtle dig at Daniel Fox. So go on, 90 seconds. Off
Right.
you
Well, if people are still with us, it's been a
go.
long show. So we're playing Swansea on Sunday, away at Swansea at 3 o'clock. Uh, I'm looking forward to it. I think we're third, but I am expecting now this up until Christmas. What I'm expecting is to win about sort of 80% of the games. And we've got Ramazani back, who was one of our star players. He's back. He probably may not start the game, but I'm sort of excited. But let's I don't know. I'm going to give him a break today. Maybe if we don't get the result, I'll start again. But we've got the players. We're playing decent football. We're playing in the championship. There's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't be turning Swansea over. So whether it's away, whether it's home, but now what I'm expecting is win, 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 occasional draw. But up until Christmas time, I want to be in the top two at Christmas. Come the new year, we should be in the top two.
You
Right,
can
that's what I'm
you,
saying.
you can tell that we're not too far away from Christmas because you're getting into your festive spirit by not having a by even giving Daniel Fark
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
a little bit of
It's
leeway.
see, what is it? Season of goodwill to all men and all that cobblers. So, all right. So on that note, right, it's Friday evening. So, I wish you a great weekend. Hope your team does well. Hope my team does well. Arsenal, I'm not sure who they're playing, but
Forest, Forest.
uh, oh, Forest. Well, it's a top of the table clash.
Top of the
Never
table.
thought I'd say that with Forest, but it is. All right. So whatever you're doing, have a great weekend. See you soon. We'll probably see you on Monday. See you later.